Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I am David Bundred, and I am the chairman of Surface Transforms. You can't see them yet because they're muted and have their cameras turned off, but we also have Kevin Johnson, who's our chief executive, and Michael Cunningham, who's currently our chief financial officer, and they're going to be doing the bulk of the presentations. Can I welcome all of you to the seminar? Thank you for taking part. Thank you for submitting a very interesting and very substantive number of questions. So what we're going to do is get straight into it. I'm going to ask Kevin to put his camera and mic on, share screen, and get on with it. The only other thing I would say is that we are going to assume that most of you know the company, so we're not going to be talking about all the details of breaking and all the rest. So, Kevin, it's over to you.
Okay, welcome everybody. Look, let's get started. Just as a quick summary, look, I'm going to assume most of you know who we are as a company. We make brake products for premium luxury cars, and we think our product is one of the best in the world, and it's got proprietary technology. We've had some of the highlights from our year have been the introduction of new contracts, expanding our customer base, and doing some carryover models. That's expanded our order bank up to 290 million. We have had some delays from customers and from our own technical problems, which I'll talk about, which are now resolved. We've got a very healthy pipeline that's behind that too, in addition to those order bank. We did a placing, and we are now an advanced manufacturer and expanding our capacity effectively day by day, but year by year. And we're trying to address a 2 billion addressable market. But I'm going to hand over to Michael now, who's going to start taking you through some of the numbers. The presentation will last about 30, maybe 40 minutes. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, as David said. And I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so just look at some of the highlights from the year. Revenue for the year went up to 5.2 million, up 116%. Obviously, that's not as high as we wanted it to be due to the technical issues that we had at the back end of the year with the furnaces. However, still a significant improvement over the prior year. Gross profit went up 100% to 3.1 million. Our margin percentage dropped off somewhat due to, in the main, the yield issues that we had, which caused us to have to run some of the furnaces light on product during the year, and also then forced us to switch our product mix to prioritise customers. R&D went up 65% to 5.6 million. Obviously, this year has been predominantly a year about proving off our processes, spending money and making sure that we were ready for the volume production. And as commented there, we did obviously spend quite a significant amount of money in the back end of the year, resolving the development of the process that we had the issues with. Loss after tax was down at 21% at 4.8 million. We're actually reasonably happy with that because what we should take from that is we have all the staffing in place to hit the run rates that are required at the back end of the year of this year. So we have all of our production staff in place, and we have all of our back office staff. We currently have probably another 20 to 30 positions to fill this year, with the bulk of those actually being our graduate and apprentice schemes, where we're trying to develop our own talent. Gross cash at the end of the year was 14.9 million, and obviously due to the reduced revenue, our EPS dropped to 2.34. So just to give a bit of an idea of where that revenue is coming from, obviously this year you can see that we're starting to move predominantly to the US. And given that 3 of our 4 major customers are American based, we expect that to continue significantly over the coming years, with this year certainly being in the 75 to 80% bracket, and probably higher than that in years after that. Again, this is the last year where probably retrofit and near OEM make up a big percentage of our revenues. You can see there that already this year we're at sort of 52%. And again, for OEM this year, we expect that to be around 80 and rising to 90 and above in subsequent years. And then finally, we've a number of development expenditure or development revenues that we get during the year. This is probably the peak year for it as a percentage of our revenues. We expect the absolute figure to remain constant probably through the rest through the company's life. However, as a percentage, obviously, it'll drop to a very low level. Okay, then moving on to the next slide. So these are just the financial highlights, obviously, of the year. Now, the one to probably draw attention to here is actually our inventory. At the year end, we are significantly overstocked. And a lot of that was down to the fact that we obviously weren't delivering into OEM yet due to our issues. And so we have built up a rather large inventory of raw material stock. Now, there's a couple of positives to that, actually. One of those is our stock, it doesn't degrade, so there's no risk attached to it. But the positive actually to take is that most of that stock that we purchased was at contract prices that had been set much earlier. So actually it's well priced and actually hedges us against inflation for a lot of this year, actually. Obviously, trade and receivables increased during the year by about £500,000, and we expect that to continue into 23 with significant levels of receivables. And during the year, we spent £8.3 million on capital expenditure. Just to give a bit of a comment around energy prices, which obviously are still very prominent in the news. Up until this point, we've obviously indicated that our efficiencies within our furnaces, from both a volume and the actual efficiency of the energy within them, would effectively give us a sort of break-even position with our electricity. As electricity pricing has started to reduce, we can now see that during this year, with a blended average of what we're paying, we expect an outturn that will give us a bit of a saving in the year, and then we will get full year effects from 2024 onwards. And then finally, looking at the gas, with gas returning to a level pretty much pre-Ukraine levels, in conjunction with our brokers, we've managed to bring ourselves down within spot on that, and we're now at a level where we're starting to fix contracts further out for probably about 75% of our expected capacity demand, and that means that we'll de-risk the company for hopefully the next 2 to 3 years.
Right, so what I'd like to do now is take you through some of our business development KPIs, first of all. It allows me to talk about some of the customers as well. And I'll just walk you through some of the highlights, really, rather than go through the whole lot. We saw an increase. If I compare the 2021 to 2022 in terms of our performance, we saw an increase in the number of contracted models we'd won. That increased by 22%, up to a total of 11 model contracts we now have. That's a relatively small increase, but I think what's more interesting is when you look at the size of those contracts, that's really represented in our lifetime contract value, which has jumped from 107 to 290 in the year off those two contracts. So we really have seen a significant growth in our order bank going forward. What's pleasing also is to see that we always measure what we call carryover contracts. So this is where a customer has already approved our product and has awarded us a contract to put it on a model of car. And then they want to leverage that and be more efficient, more efficient, more productive by taking that product and putting it on the next one. So we measure how many of those we have. We were able to increase that during 2022, up to 4 of those 11 contracts. So that gives us a lot of confidence for winning repeat business with our current customer base going forward. What we also saw was with those sizable contracts we won, the contract life, the average contract life has increased from 4 years to 6. To give everyone a reference, a typical model life for a car might be 7 years. When we were doing models that were down at 4 or less, they're probably more exotic and limited edition models that we were winning. what that's really telling us is, as a KPI, is that we're now moving into more mainstream model contracts. As we move into those, obviously the average goes up, and we're now up to 6, and we'd expect that to continue to rise up to 7 as we move through those mainstream contracts. In terms of those contracts being converted into series production revenues, we look at that, and we were able to add 2 more of those contracts into series during 2022. One of them in particular was very important to us, which is the one with OEM 8. And OEM 8 does form a significant part of our revenue going forward into 2023. Now, there was a slight delay with the introduction and the launch of that product from the customer side. And then we obviously have had some technical issues with that product in terms of just at the very back end of the year and into the start of Q1. And I will talk about that in a bit more detail when we get into the operational side of the business. But our customer has been very supportive and has worked very closely with us, and they've been able to effectively manage their demands and their production to marry up with what we've been able to supply until we've resolved that technical issue. And so that's been put through now. Now, as I mentioned, we're probably very concentrated for 2023 and into 2024 in terms of our revenue from OEM 8. We'd like to reduce that and dilute that concentration. So we are always looking at trying to add new customers to our customer base. And we did that in 2022 and added a new one, took our OEMs up to 6. And it's fair to say that when you look out past 2023 into 24, 25, 26, we see 3 main customers being OEM 5, 8, and 10, all becoming sort of equal revenue generators for us. And the 4th leg to our table, if you like, would be the rest of our OEM customers plus our near OEM and retrofit business, making up an equal bucket of revenue, but combining those all together. So we do see a point where we start to diversify our customer base in terms of revenue along those 3 major customers, having those other activities as a 4th as well. And the final KPI on this slide is looking at the prospective contract pipeline, our PCP. And what we're effectively doing during 2022 is converting that 400 million into contracts. And we took about 180 million out of that and added to our contract value. What's pleasing is we've seen further demand filling up our PCP. So our PCP has pretty much stayed static at circa 400 million. And what I would say is the makeup of that contract pipeline has been changing. I think when we looked at it in the past, it was probably 50-50 between combustion engine cars and electric vehicles. We did talk about the trend towards electric vehicles and the marrying up of electric vehicles with carbon solid brakes. That's continued. It's fair to say probably more than 90% of our current order bank is now with electric vehicles. And so that shift from combustion engine to electric vehicles is continuing and will be complete over the coming years. So I'll move on now to the next slide, which is just talking about a little bit of the market conditions and the trends, and how we've been navigating our way through those. It is a challenging business environment. You've heard Michael talk about the inflationary pressures, including energy. We've managed to negotiate that reasonably well, and we don't see that becoming a major issue, as Michael said, going forward. But nonetheless, it does need work and constant attention. But we are seeing other pressures in terms of inflation, and I will touch on those as part of the operational side. ESG is very important to us, and I will give you a little bit of more color to what we're doing in terms of our ESG activities. But the 2 really that stick out the most in terms of what we've been working on are our scale up and execution risks. And one of the things we have been highlighting to you is some of the technical challenges we've been had and the difficulties we've been had. I will get into more detail on that too. And we have seen some supply chain risks, particularly with our customer during 2022, where there was some customer delays, which saw our revenues not grow as fast as we would have liked. But we also are seeing some supply chain risks from our own supply chain, and how we manage those risks. There are a number of approaches, but we have alternative supplies. But we also need to talk about how we do things ourselves and take control of some of those supply chains that we have. And it's the last part really to say about that is we are shielded and a little bit in terms of the segment we're in from some of those automotive pressures that are out there. I usually get asked the question about are there any other shortages for chips and things affecting our supply and demand, and the answer is not really. For the vehicles we supply, they are very at the high end, the luxury flagship models. Um, the OEMs will always prioritize those models before they move into their other models if they have any supply issues. So we are shielded from that. So let's just move on and start to talk in a bit more detail about those operational challenges we've been facing in the ESG. And first, I'd like to sort of give you a bit more color around those technical difficulties we've been having, particularly in Q1 of this year. We've been ramping up and getting our run rates up throughout 2022, and we've been working our way through that manufacturing process and dealing with challenges and problems as they arise. Now, we got to a point where we were at a process called melt and filtration. That's effectively where we melt a metal at very high temperatures and then absorb that metal as a liquid into our parts to create the ceramic. And we found that as we were running those furnaces, we started to see that the yield from those furnaces was very poor. And when we looked into that, we started to identify problems with the furnaces in terms of its compatibility with the process. In particular, we were degrading the furnace linings, the insulation linings, very, very quickly. And so what these linings would typically last, anywhere between 6 and 12 months before you have to reline them. And it is a normal routine maintenance job. We found that we were destroying those furnace linings within about a month, maybe even less, maybe 3 weeks. And that degradation was causing temperature issues within the furnace, causing a temperature differential to occur. So we'd have cold spots and hot spots. And that was really what was causing us to have a low yield and effectively a low output. Now, to reline a furnace and to put it back to a standard, we went to our supply chain to get those linings. And those linings are normally available within a few weeks. With the stresses on supply chains, particularly for graphite insulation, those lead times had jumped from a few weeks to a year. So we were struggling to be able to cope with relining. We have a number of these furnaces, and so that we were effectively running all of those furnaces at a degraded state. The solution to the problem was to take control of the supply chain and really to start to understand how we could make some refinements to what we were doing in terms of running the furnaces, make some refinements and start to design the furnace the way we wanted it to be more compatible with our process. Part of that was to redesign the linings ourselves, come up with a new design of hot zone. We retasked some of our own engineers, that are process engineers and our product engineers, and we tasked them to start looking at how they could become furnace designers and design the furnace themselves. And we went through that during the first part of Q1. We did a lot of bench modeling first, and then we moved into equipping furnaces with new designed linings. And those linings weren't just, principally we went from a curved structure to flat structures that we could machine and manipulate ourselves. And that's because those materials are readily available. We can buy those next day. And then we went through a whole series of design processes where we looked at how we could protect those materials better and make them last longer. And then we also made some tweaks to the process to allow the compatibility to be better as well. Now, as we moved through into sort of mid to late February, we realized and recognized that we'd done enough work that we had a solution. We started to see yields not just creep up, but bounce back to very good levels. And we then decided we needed to roll this new design of furnace with this new tweaks to our process out across all the furnaces we have. We've been doing that throughout Q1, and then we were also trying to ensure that we were getting a proper result. One swallow doesn't make a summer. When we've done this, we wanted to make sure it was repeatable and that we were getting statistical data. And by the end of sort of Q1, entering Q2, we'd had a number of weeks of running, and we've made hundreds of parts, and we're able to start to talk about being in a position where we've resolved those issues. Now, what we need to do now in Q2, which is what we've been getting on with, is progressively ramping back up. We have part of the system we need to refill. Then we have a number of these furnaces which we can now reline a furnace within a week from readily available materials. So we've been relining furnaces throughout Q2. And by the end of Q2, we'll have reached our full ramp rate and reached our full capacity, so that we head into the second half of the year in very good shape at the run rates we want. So we're pleased with, if you like, with what we've done to resolve those issues, but we have had the penalty of time, which we can't get back. And I'll talk a little bit about how those opportunities for perhaps catching back some of those lost sales is related to our capacity as well as to our customers' ability to take extra product in the second half of the year later. Now, I mentioned the supply chain pressures. Obviously, we've been protected from the energy pricing with fixed-term contracts that we've had. Those have now expired, and we'll be going through a process now, as Michael said, of putting some new contracts in place. But those volatile prices have certainly returned, not quite to normal, but to a position where we'd anticipated, and we can take that forward. But there are some general price pressures from our supply chain, both for direct and indirect costs. We are seeing those pressures affect our margin, relatively small, perhaps 1 or 2% in terms of our gross margin. And there are pressures for our capital investment program, which is obviously there to build more capacity. And although that's progressing well, and I'll talk in a bit more detail, we are seeing some tough negotiations happening on some of those equipment suppliers going forward. We will get through that in the next few months, but it's fair to say that there is an impact in the supply chain on the inflationary pressures that are happening. In terms of then what we can do and get back to normal business running, that's all about continuous improvement and cost reduction for us. Mitigating some of those inflationary pressures is really down to us returning to what we've done before, where we have in the past halved the cost of manufacture. We believe we can do that again. There are lots of pieces of work. We're a relatively immature advanced manufacturer, so our processes have lots of opportunity for improving productivity and improving efficiencies. And we are now getting back to that task of bringing those through. Not least with the electricity usage we have. Some of those new furnaces we are bringing on stream as part of our capacity expansion, as Michael said, will give us a significant reduction in our electricity usage, as well as in our gas usage. And there are other waste streams that we have that we think we can either eliminate or reduce significantly as well. So alongside that, there are still other risks in terms of what the business manages on a day-to-day basis. One of those is our cyber security. We get a threat probably daily. We haven't had a breach, nor do we want one. And we want to improve our security as a continuous improvement project. We recruited a new head of IT during 2022, and he's been putting together with his team a program of work to improve our cyber security, and that was launched. And we are going to monitor it and effectively use it as a continuous improvement program going forward. But it is a continuous risk, and it's something the business has to manage. And alongside that, along the same theme, our business systems, we use SAP as our main business system. That's the right system for what we want to do in the automotive industry, but there are certainly opportunities where we can make it work smarter and better. And again, there's now a focus on developing our business systems for future productivity alongside those cost reduction programs that are on the processes as well. Now, from a staffing point of view and infrastructure point of view, that's all progressing well. We do plan to strengthen the executive management team, and that's principally where we recognise that now we are running at higher run-up rates. We're effectively manufacturing on a day-to-day basis. We're trying to add more capacity all the time, as well as in the future add a new factory as well. The breadth of what we're doing is quite broad, and we want to bring somebody else in to support that. And we're at the final stages. We're just waiting for when a new COO can join us from their existing employment, but that'll be in the second half of the year, and we're very pleased to have them joining us to help support the team and drive the team forward in our ambitious plans going forward in the future. And alongside that, I know you'll be aware of this. Michael, our current CFO, is leaving us. He'll be leaving us just before the half year, and we are in the process of recruiting. And we're quite a way down that process of recruiting a replacement for Michael as a new CFO. Now, there's a point on here about we'll be putting forward some new proposals for approval at our AGM to cover a share incentive scheme and a long-term incentive scheme for managers, as well as an EBT, Employment Benefit Trust. What we've seen as part of the recruitment is we want to motivate and retain our key members of staff. To do that, we need the right incentives. Yet we also are at a point where the existing schemes with the EMI schemes we had in place were now just too big, and they're not actually open to us anymore. So we will be putting forward some detail as part of our resolutions for shareholders to vote on at the AGM for those schemes. The rest of our recruitment plans are going well and on track. We're recruiting a similar number of people this year as we did last year, so we're still in a high sort of recruitment mode. There is a change in recruitment, I would say. Last year we were recruiting people that had particular skills and training and experience so they could hit the ground running. And I know Michael mentioned it earlier, we're now in the mode of where we recognize we need to start building our own succession plans and developing our own people. As part of that, we've launched our own apprenticeship and graduate schemes. They've gone very well through 22 and into 23. And we're really quite excited about the talent that we've seen as part of those recruitment processes. And as part of that, we also recognize we need to be able to develop the team, and we put our own in-house training resources in place to help support the team, train the team, and develop them so that they can be the people for the future of the business to take it where we want it to go. Now, just touching on ESG, our product credentials from an environmental point of view are well understood, I think, from everybody. What I would say is the one that's been emerging as a product strength has been the use of ceramics to reduce the amount of brake dust pollution. By using a ceramic, you can reduce the brake dust pollution by about half by reduced wear rates of pads. And that's important because as we've moved over from combustion engine cars to electric vehicles, the emissions from engines is going away. The next biggest pollutants on cars are tires and brakes for the quality of air. And there are new regulations coming in the EU in 2025, which are really quite stringent. And there are a number of ways to achieve that, but one of them that the vehicle manufacturers are recognizing is that they can do that by adding ceramic brakes to a car. And we're seeing more and more of them interested in selecting ceramics for the car due to that reason. But our focus really isn't on the product, it's on it's on process. And there is, as I've mentioned already on the cost reduction, there is lots of opportunity here to reduce our carbon footprint by reducing our energy usage, reducing our natural gas usage, which is our raw material. And we can also start to recycle some of our waste streams, in particular the carbon gases as well, and generate our own power in the future. And that's where the focus is. For the social side, I've mentioned our recruitment program. We are creating lots of jobs. This year, it's all about the apprenticeships and graduate programs. And we are in an underdeveloped, deprived area of the country. So those jobs are very welcome, and they are high-skilled, high-paid jobs. So we're very proud of the fact that we are doing that and making a difference in our neighbourhood. But we have also recognised that in those recruitment processes and trying to develop that pipeline of talent, that there's certainly some links with schools that aren't there, and those links and pathways for students who are or want to do STEM subjects, so science, engineering, mathematics, that type of thing, are relevant to us, very relevant to what we do. That link and understanding of pathways to working in a business, doing those types of roles, is probably not well understood, and it might even be broken in certain places. So we've started to develop links with schools, and we are going into schools and trying to explain to them that the importance of learning maths, physics, chemistry, those kind of things, and then explain to them how they can apply them. And when we tell them that we make the brakes for some of the fastest and most powerful cars in the world just around the corner in Knowsley, the students are blown away, and those students then start to get enthused about why they should be learning those subjects at school. So it's a really important topic, and it's something we're taking more and more interest in and developing the links with our local schools. And finally, on the governance of the piece, we've spent the last sort of 18 months or so refreshing the board, and that was primarily to increase the independence of the board. The last edition was last year with Ian Clemson joining the board, and he's now taken on the chairmanship of the audit committee as well. And we'll address whether we need to refresh the board further as and when required. So look, moving on to the next big piece of work that we're working on, which is all about manufacturing capacity. And that's really to support our customers and the contract growth. Phase one of our capacity is complete. That gives us that 20 million of annual revenue capability. And as I mentioned earlier, and I'll repeat it now, we had those technical difficulties in Q1. We've resolved them at the end, sort of mid to end of Q1. We've been ramping up in Q2, and we will be at full capacity during the second half of 2023. And that then allows us to support those current contracts and current contract models. Now, running at full capacity is great, but it does give us a challenge in terms of our resilience. Things will always go wrong for any manufacturer. I think there will always be the unexpected, and as much as we can try and prevent it and work with it, we aren't running as well as we would like in terms of our buffers and having some cushion in our manufacturing processes, just because of the technical problems we had to resolve. We'd like to start putting those back on the shelf, but it's difficult when we're running at full capacity. So part of the solution to that and having no spare capacity is to build phase two, which has been in the planning and execution for the last 18 months. And we're really starting to get towards the end of it. That will increase our capacity from 20 million to 50 million per year. There have been some challenges, as I mentioned, on the supply chain there. But the last two pieces of kit, which are key furnaces, are going to be delivered in Q2. The first one has actually arrived a couple of weeks ago, and we'll be getting on with building that on site and then commissioning it through Q2 into Q3. And similarly with the second key furnace, that will be delivered. I know we've completed the factory acceptance tests at the supplier's site, so they are in the process of dismantling it, and we'll be bringing that down and getting that delivered and on site as quickly as we can in the coming weeks and months. But as I say, that phase two capacity is vital, not just to give us that resilience and spare capacity we need this year, and then it also puts us in good shape for the growth in revenues we're expecting next year, where it will start to be utilized to generate those revenues as well. Now, as we start to consume the capacity in phase two, we know we're going to be continuing our growth curve. We need to add more capacity. That's what our fundraise last year was all about. And that's phase 3.1, where we equip the rest of the factory and bring our capacity up to 75 million. Now, that does continue to provide further resilience and growth, which we will need in 2025. It's all on track, probably for the end of 24. Most of the purchase orders have been placed for most of the manufacturing processes. There are a few CNC machines that we will order as and when required. And as I touched on earlier, we've got a couple of key furnaces that we are still negotiating with suppliers. Those negotiations are tough, but we expect to get them done over the coming few weeks and months. Now, our growth curve takes us beyond our current factory footprint, so it's really about planning beyond 24 and 25 and 26. And that's where we have our, if you like, site extension. Our strategy here is, as we've completed the build of our factory for 75 million, we want to de-risk the expansion up to 150 million by replicating it. So we talk about replicating that site with a new factory. We have signed some heads of terms. It's broadly the same size as what we've already got, and it'll be about getting that heads of terms complete and legalized over the next few weeks. and then we can sign that off, because we need to get on with the building so that we can start to build phase 3.2 capacity, which will be required sort of 2 years, maybe 2.5 years from now. And so now's the time we need to be getting on with actually getting our boots on the ground and getting the work done. So look, if I could just summarize what we've been talking to you about, and then we'll get on to questions. In terms of our manufacturing capacity, look, the technical difficulties we've had have been resolved. That means our phase 1 capacity of 20 million is up and running, and it will be running at full capacity in the second half of this year. That doesn't give us a lot of resilience and spare capacity. So it's as I've mentioned, it's important we get phase 2, which takes us up to 50 million, and that's on track for the second half of this year as well. And then it's really about continuing our progress into phase 3.1 and phase 3.2. 3.1 being is on track for 24, then expand to 75, and then we will continue into 25 and 26 with the 150 million expansion. All of that is to support sustainable recurring revenues with our customers, the OEMs. Our OEM customers' expectations are unchanged. Arguably, we've solidified more of their expectations by converting our pipeline into order bank. And they've been well aware of our technical difficulties and have worked very closely as we've managed our way through that. That allows us to talk about those growing revenues with good margins and profitability. And as a reminder, that's all based on our order bank of 290 million and that strong PCP of circa 400 million. So to summarize the trading we had in the year, we did have significant revenue growth, albeit not as high as we would have liked. We were constrained by some customer delays in particular, and then those technical scale up issues we had at the end of the year. But now that all of that's resolved from our customers' perspective and ours, it leads us on to a positive outlook with high revenue growth from those series model contracts. And look, the focus for us this year isn't really on the pipeline. Obviously, if customers are wanting to source us and give us contracts, we will take them, and we're always having discussions. But our focus is very clearly on delivery. We want to get quietly on with delivery through this year using our phase 1 capacity and introducing that phase 2 capacity for resilience. So hopefully that gives you a good color and flavor of where we're up to as a business. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll then move over to questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Firstly, thanks to all the shareholders on the call who's for sending in a very substantive number of questions. We've got enough questions to keep us going for the rest of the day. But I'm going to try and use half an hour. It doesn't matter if we overrun a little bit to go through the questions. And I'm going to try and group them because we have had an astonishing number of new questions. I'm going to group them into sort of operations, then cash, then management changes, and then on customers. Can we start off with the question? I think this has been covered in the presentation, but I make no apologies for asking the question, even though I think we've been covered. Let's begin with Martin Holmes. Martin Holmes asks, in the present rate for discs, is the run rate for the remainder of Q2, or is there still some increase required in May, June? In other words, how is Q2 going to look like, Kevin? I think you answer it again.
Yeah, look, I think it's an important point, and Q2. I'd love to be able to say we could just switch the capacity back on those technical difficulties, but you've got to refill a system. We've got multiple furnaces. We've got more than 10 furnaces that we will be equipping, and each one of those furnaces takes a week to reline. So what we're really doing through Q2 is putting in place all of those parts that we need to keep the supply and the pipeline running, upgrading those furnaces with the new technical solutions we've done, and that will allow us to ramp up probably by the end of May into June to where we can start to talk about being at the run at rates we want to be at to supply for the rest of the year.
Okay, Peter, again, staying with operations, Philip Tracy's asked questions that, again, I think we'll cover, but for the sake of being explicit, can we cover them again? I mean, is the root cause of these problems now well understood? Were these problems related to a single furnace, or were they more systemic? Has a permanent solution been identified? And if so, what confidence does management have that these will not recur? And what's the implications on future production uptime? So was it fixed? Was it the root cause identified? Was it fixed? What's the ongoing, Kevin?
Yeah, look, first of all, is it well understood? The answer to that is we spent a lot of time doing very detailed root cause analysis. We got to those root causes. Invariably with all of this stuff, it isn't just one root cause. So there were multiple root causes to this that we've been able to detail and then resolve. Is it across other furnaces? No. That's not to say that I think it's worth pointing out here that with any manufacturing process, as you scale it and build it up, we've had problems across all processes and all furnaces. What we don't talk about in the public domain very often is the resolution of those. We just get on with it and get it done. So this particular problem was related to one particular furnace process. It's now well understood, so it's ring fenced in that point of view. We have now put permanent solutions in place. What we have done to the process, what we have done to the equipment, and then marrying those two things together has allowed us to talk about putting those permanent solutions in place. And part of the caution we had, where we didn't want to say that we had a solution in Q1, was we wanted to actually be running these furnaces and building up, again, a material amount of statistical data on the solutions we've put in place before we could then say confidently that we had a permanent solution. The one thing I will highlight is there is one piece still to resolve, that is how long these furnace linings will last. We've moved away from them lasting sort of 3 to 4 weeks. And the good news is the new linings are working very, very well. So well, we don't know when they're going to degrade yet. We might get back to normal running where we do them once a year or once every 6 months, but that's just normal manufacturing where we will monitor the furnaces, monitor the performance of them, and as they need relining, we will do it, and that's our permanent solution. So I think all of that gives me, the last part of it was what's my confidence. I'm now very confident that we have flushed through all of the issues we've had in scale up, and this being the last one. And we've got now confidence that there will always be day-to-day challenges to face, but in terms of core technical execution difficulties, these are behind us.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question take a question from Dion Stewart. It's more of explanation more than anything else. We've had this question with the institutions, and it's to do with cells and moving away from cells. The question is, it's not clear what adding each new cell consists of. Is it principally an extra furnace, or is it a complete suite of stages, stage 1 to stage 10 as shown on your website? Can you just explain how the factory is organized now? Because I can understand why people are concerned about cells, because that's how we used to be organized, but we're not organized like that anymore.
Yeah, look, the previous approach was that we would have cells which were independent, so they would be able to make ceramic break this from start to finish. So, and they would work independently from each other. Now, that was a good place to start, but as we've found that the demand and the scale up has been accelerating, that isn't the way to do it going forward, because you're busy building relatively small cells, and you can't just implement those multiple at the same time. So what we decided to do was move away from individual cells to one single production line. And now probably where a bit more confusion comes in, so we have a plant flow. So raw materials come in effectively one door, and then they flow through the plant through all the different processes and then go out the other door. Now, that doesn't mean we only have one machine for each process. We may have multiple machines doing the same process, but they are all running simultaneously, and they all pass product from one process flow to the next. And that's the way the plant is set up now. So it's a plant flow. There may be multiple machines for each process, but they are all connected. So when I talk about filling a system, it's about filling the entire plant, not just one cell.
Okay, I think we deliberately spent a lot of time on the operations, but most of the questions were on the operations. And I think we've satisfied shareholders that, frankly, we think we fixed it. We're getting on with it, and that will come out, and we're not short of demand. I'm going to move on now to the whole issue and bring Michael in now, because we've been asked about what are our plans for capital raises. From Mark Meredith, what's your expectations for future capital raises? And there's another one from, I think it was John Kemmer, who was asking about have we now got the cash we need to maintain the momentum on our capital expenditure? So, over to you, Michael.
Yeah. So the way we see this, obviously, the raise from last year was designed to get us to this £150 million revenue that we're building towards, with an expectation of a decent amount of that would come from free cash flow. So we still anticipate that is the case, and that we will deliver our growth through free cash flow. Obviously, there are other factors that come in, which, as always, big contract wins and maybe acceleration of capital expenditure, and but we're at a point probably about the back end of this year where, with a significant number of months of profitability, we would expect to start to see debt become an option for us. And so between free cash flow and debt, the company believe that we are sort of probably in a position now to not require future capital raises. But we'd never say never, ultimately, because you just don't know what's going to happen. But that's our expectation, certainly for the 150 million revenue mark.
Yeah, I was quite explicit in the chairman's statements. We believe we have sufficient cash to maintain the momentum to fund the business, and maintain the momentum on the capital expenditure program. I don't think we collectively can be any more explicit than that. What do we need to say? Let's move on to a question which I will take from Andy McTavish. Sorry, can we have monthly updates? No is the answer. And the reason is, I just think it's unhelpful. I think putting out news every month, then people will ask it for every week, and the next thing you'll be asking for, people will be asking for daily production figures. We've said, unusually for companies of our size and our name, that we will produce quarterly updates this year. And we will produce quarterly updates. I really, really think it's unhelpful to do more than that. So let's move on then to the whole issue that has been asked by a few people, by Dion Stewart, which I think, again, Kevin, you covered in your presentation about operational management and what are we doing on the question is, say you're intending to recruit a person for the new position of Chief Operating Officer, reporting directly to the CEO. Any update on making a permanent appointment? I think you just repeat what you said before.
Yeah, let me just repeat it. Look, we have somebody, and the reason we haven't made any any announcements about it is because we're still waiting on an actual start date. Their current employer and them need to discuss that. We need to agree a start date. When we're there, we're there. But we're very pleased with where we've got to with that, and they will be a really good asset, and we'll gel with the team when they join.
Yeah, there's a few questions about the interim appointment we've made while that's been going on, and what the role is. And I think it's fair to say it has been a very, very helpful process, and the individual concerned is doing a cracking job. But he's been helping us on what I'd call plumbing of the business. Actually, it's probably a bad example when you talk about a bad word to use in the context of but but what I mean by that are the processes, the sales and operation planning processes, the TQ process, the things those of us who know factories take for granted in factories, and I think we needed quite a bit of help, candidly, in that area, and I think that's been well done. I'd like to move on to the commercial side of it, and also can I also say to everybody, if you feel we haven't adequately answered your questions on operations, if we haven't adequately answered them on the cash or adequately answered them on operations, just ask them in the chat line, and we'll pick them up again. Right on customers, because we haven't talked about customers enough. Alan Firth asks. Market forecasts historically were based on confirmed contracts. Do the forecast cuts, strong word, indicate contracts are being lost in 23-25? And if not, what's been happening on the customer contract front?
Yeah, so I think if you take this year, look, we're going to start by coming back to operations and capacity. We had planned to be effectively at a higher run rate in Q1 and and less so in Q2 of this year, where we've had effectively lost sales. Now they're not. That's a strong word as well, saying the lost sales. They're not lost sales. We've effectively worked with the customers and juggled their demand schedules so that we can get going. Now the next job is to start hitting those run rates that we planned, which we'll be getting on with. And then you say, well, is there any opportunity to overproduce in the second half of the year and try and catch back some of those lost sales, because they're still there, because the customers' demands and contracts haven't changed. So the answer to that is yes. If as we implement phase 2 of our capacity, we have the opportunity to then overproduce. However, the supply chain for this product, particularly for OEM8, where that demand is, requires about half a dozen suppliers to be able to overproduce. So there's a whole conversation that then has to go on between ourselves, the customer, and the rest of their supply chain to see whether they can overproduce to be able to start to increase that demand earlier than planned. Now that may not happen. We'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, we've just reflected the fact that we will assume that we won't overproduce for the second half of the year, and that's then reflected in the numbers. And then going forward in 2024, the contracts are there. I would say the biggest thing about our contracts isn't the demand side. The demand is normally well understood. It's always the timing. And as we have experienced with many of our contracts, timing delays of launch. Once they're launched, they work fine. But getting launch is always the challenge for the OEM. We haven't got that many launches this year, so there aren't that many risks from this year. Like I say, it's all about delivery this year. But there are some launches next year, so we try and build in contingency into next year, and that's probably what you're seeing in terms of the numbers. The contract size and the demand hasn't changed, but we will always build in contingency to try and manage delays going forward.
Can I just add something there, Kevin? And it's in the nature of the way these questions get asked that it makes me think that something we just take for granted isn't understood outside the automotive industry. And it is a simple fact that once you have been selected and engineered on a car, you're on it. You cannot lose that contract. The only reason that those sales will not ultimately happen is the car gets cancelled, or they don't sell as many of the car, which isn't relevant to us so much. So we don't lose contract. You don't lose contracts. Once you've won them, you don't lose them. If you screw it up completely, you might not get another contract with that customer. But you don't lose them. It's just not the nature of it. It's too expensive to re-engineer. And I say frequently that our great defense, our moat, if you like, once you've won a contract, isn't the contract. They've got more lawyers than we've got. It isn't the contract. It's the amount of engineering that is required to change the supplier. So that's at the heart. That's the heart of it. Can I just pick up another one, and I'll answer this question, and it's because the answer is I haven't got a clue. And it's the question on the share price. And people are asking me, why did the share price go down? Why has it stayed down? And so on and so forth. And all we can say is we can influence the performance of the business. We can produce our numbers, live to our numbers, but we have no influence over the share price. And sometimes we look on it with the same sense of mystery when it goes up as the same sense of mystery as when it goes down. We just simply don't know. The one thing we haven't talked about, Kevin, there's a good question here by Bruce Furr, who about competition, and I think it's from Bruce. That is, oh no, sorry, from Marco Ritchie. I'll take Bruce's question later. Marco Ritchie, competitors, as you are proving to be a superior product and increasingly well known in the sector, what do you know about competitors? What are they doing to improve the disc to match yours? How protected are you from competitors developing continuous weave rotor like yours? Just talk a little about competitors, Kevin, because we hadn't really talked about it in the presentation, or indeed in the Q&A.
No, that's a fair point. I'll split it into two on competitors. Let me talk about they're effectively, we've got one big competitor, first of all, who's well established in the marketplace. And that's when I compare our product to theirs and talk about it being superior. And then I'll talk about the maybe new entrants or other potential competition going forward. Yes, we have got a superior product. We've been saying that all along, and our customers now tell us that. I think it's quite simple, really. I think our main competitor recognizes that fact as well. And I genuinely believe they will generate their own continuous fiber product with very good thermal properties as well, and all the things that we talk about as being ours. Are they there yet? I think they've started to talk about a product that has those attributes. I'm aware that they're not quite there because I don't think they have the capacity. I don't think they have the lead times, and I certainly don't think they have the cost base right. So I think it's a flattering thing, but our competitor is now coming around to our way of thinking that this is the technology needs to be what we've defined. That said, do I worry about them producing a product of a similar nature? Not really, because there are only two players in the marketplace today, and actually, this market is capacity constrained rather than highly competitive. We do compete against each other, but ultimately it's a growing market, and markets grow with competition. So we actually need two suppliers in the marketplace. That's the reason we've been successful. When there was a monopoly supply, with our competitor being the main market supplier, all of the OEMs effectively were pulling us through to be the alternative. So now that we're there, I think there's always going to be two players, and I think there'll be competition in the future. But I think they're moving towards our way of thinking rather than us moving towards theirs. So that's the mainstream competition. Are there going to be new entrants? Probably, but are there going to be new entrants in the near term? Certainly not. Are we protected? Yes, our product is. I think we've demonstrated with the difficulties we've had with the scale up that our product is protected. So, if I could pick any silver lining out of the pain I've been going through, it is the fact that the product is highly complex to produce. It isn't you can't reverse engineer it, and there's a lot of expertise that goes into it. So that's the first thing to say. The second one is, as David mentioned, once you're on a program, it takes years to get on a program, and then once you're on it for 7 years plus. So we've effectively got a 10-year cycle that somebody has to go through before they would be displacing us from our position. So not only do I feel confident from a technology point of view, there's a very long barrier to entry from that, and there's a very long lead time for a new entrant to come in. That said, there are some around. I am aware of stuff going on in China and Korea, and we do keep an eye on it, but I don't think they're there yet.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Can I take the question from Bruce now, from Bruce Fair? It's about the States and moving to the States, which is a question I've had about a number of institutions this week, actually. The specific question is, with the Inflation Reduction Act and deglobalization that's taking place, will our US-based customers need us, require us to produce our discs in the USA?
Well, they won't need us to do it, but certainly there's a lot of things that would say it would be a very interesting question and answer to give by producing this in the States. Not least, as Bruce has just pointed out, a lot of our customer base is going to be over there. A lot of our revenue is going to come from the US. So there is an argument: do we want to be closer to our customer? You would always say yes to that. There's also an argument from a cost to manufacture. It has not escaped our notice that power and gas, two of our key components and which are material costs to producing a disc, are significantly cheaper in the US than they are in mainland Europe and the UK. And there are certainly lots of incentives for bringing or onshoring manufacturing in the US right now. So, and those are set to continue. So there are some compelling arguments to say, yes, maybe there should be a factory in the US, but it isn't the factory we're building now. We spent quite a bit of time debating this ourselves. And again, I'll draw everyone's attention to the fact that the execution and scale-up risks, we believed, far outweighed the benefits of putting a plant on international soil rather than next door, because the risks of us getting it wrong, I think, are plain to see. The risks of getting a benefit in terms of incentives and reducing the cost, that will come later. So I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just saying it won't happen. We've made the decision not to do it now. As we grow and the need is there to build another factory, then we'll look at it again.
And I would add, Kevin, that was a very explicit discussion with OEM 10 at the time. Because
yes, it was. Yeah.
I remember it's just worth fleshing that out a little bit as to the discussion we had. By the way, OEM 10 knew all about phase 3.1, 3.2 before you guys did, before we went to the marketplace, because the capacity we put in place was self-evidently for them. Because we won the contract just afterwards, and they were part of our capacity planning tools plans. Do you want to just flesh that out again?
Yeah, well, we make our own decisions, but they are, as you rightly so, very keen to understand and influence those decisions as we make them. And we shared all of that detail about replicating our factory, and all of the guys who are very, very experienced in manufacturing cars, and they've done it for many years at very high volumes, couldn't agree with us more. They were like, well, we wanted to ask the question about putting it in the US. We couldn't agree with you more that you shouldn't do it right now. But we also couldn't agree with you more that it's probably something for the future.
Yeah. I mean, somebody wants to move, the US might find themselves pushing on an open door. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat room about operations again, so I'm hoping that we've satisfied the questions on the operations and calm people down. There's a question, and I'm probably going to wrap up with this because it's a question from Martin Holmes about your engineering team. It's in the chat box, Kevin, if you see it there. With your engineering team being diverted to solving the insulation issue, does it begin to make surface transform manage what other aspects you could own in the specification? Easy one to answer. For example, do you want to be a furnace manufacturer? I think we've got the skills to be a furnace manufacturer now, but I don't want to be one. Sorry, Kevin. I'm turning it over to you, Kevin. Could you answer that question about where you want to go from here, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'd like to answer it with, there's a relationship between we develop a product and a process, and that's what we should be good at. The equipment to do those processes is where we would always go to our supply chain and ball furnaces. Now, what tends to happen between those two is there's a symbiotic relationship where the furnace manufacturer will build a furnace and will specify it to do certain temperatures, certain pressures, certain gases, whatever it is you want. But they will never specify a furnace to do a process. And that connection between equipment and process is generally missing. And the way most industries get around it is the fact that they're very well-known processes. So all of that work has been done. What we've effectively done is then stepped into that middle space to say, well, if the furnace manufacturer can't understand our process to make the furnace do what we want it to do, we'll have to step into their space. We do not want to be a furnace manufacturer. So let me be clear on that one. However, we recognize that there's a skill base required to facilitate equipment to be built to run our processes. And that's been the piece that we've added to our bow as we've gone through these challenging times. But we aren't planning to become furnace manufacturers in any shape or form.
In fact, I said that would be the last question, but there's a sort of similar question which we should probably take as, again, it's been asked a few times by the institutions. It's from Chris Keane. Are there any plans to develop other brake components? If so, what would you like or to make and when? So, easy question for you, Kevin.
That's it. Yeah, it is. Look, are there any plans to make other brake components? Again, the answer would be no, but I would draw everyone's attention to we're not interested in making other components, but we are interested in the integration of all those components together. So back to this space where you might, in our case, there's a pad, there's a caliper, there's a disc. Somebody has to integrate those into a system that works on the car, and that's not an easy task. That's something we recognize is something our competitor does. So they have a competitive advantage over us, and that's a space where we want to take that competitive advantage away. We have been developing our skills to look at integration, but it's more about being able to then utilize those skills of integration to leverage our product and technology for the future. The industry is currently developed and got an understanding of our competitors' product and uses that learning to size and integrate brakes. That we believe they're effectively over-engineering the product. We believe there's an opportunity to shrink the size of our product. So by shrinking the size, it would make it available for more market because price and size are directly linked. And if we want to penetrate further down into even more mainstream models, it's a simple price elasticity curve. So the future for us, and it isn't the next few years, but it's looking much more longer term, is to become much more skilled in integration, be able to integrate our product into systems, and then be able to work with the OEM to allow those systems to be sized correctly and for our technology. And if we do that, there is lots of opportunity for the future.
Okay, I really am going to, because I see we're 10 minutes overrun, but we've had half an hour on questions. And again, as always, if you feel we haven't answered them, send us an email. We answer our emails eventually, but we do answer. Would I just, in terms of absolutely wrapping up, and firstly thank everybody. I see we've hardly lost anybody during the Q&A, which is unusual. So thank you for that. Thank you very much, everybody. And I suggest we close to that. And thank you for taking part. Goodbye.